I'll be taking the house, the business, and both investment properties. The old bloke can sort out the rates and the tax bill. That's what my son-in-law said at the reading of my wife's will. Didn't whisper it. Didn't mumble it under his breath. Said it loud and clear, in a solicitor's office in Parramatta, with Sylvia barely 3 days in the ground. Everyone in the room looked at me like I was furniture. Until the solicitor opened the next page and said, "Actually, the company was never registered in your wife's name. It was registered under." Follow my story to the end and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has reached. My name is Clive. I'm 62 years old. And the worst day of my life didn't come when I buried my wife. It came 3 days after, in a beige carpeted office that smelled like old paper and instant coffee, surrounded by people who hadn't bothered to ring me in months. The solicitor, Mr. Wainwright, was a careful man. Thin shoulders, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of bloke who weighed every word before he let it leave his mouth. Sylvia had chosen him 15 years ago to handle our affairs, and I'd never questioned it. I never questioned much of anything Sylvia did. She was the kind of woman who made decisions the way other people breathe, naturally, competently, without fuss. My daughter Tessa sat across from me. She was 36, but in that moment she looked like the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during cricket on the telly. Her eyes were swollen. She'd been crying for 3 days straight and hadn't eaten properly since the funeral. I wanted to reach over and hold her hand, but the table between us felt wider than the Nullarbor. Next to Tessa sat Dominic, my son-in-law. He was checking his phone when I walked in, and he was still checking it when Wainwright started talking. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. His shoes were polished so hard you could see the ceiling in them. He didn't look up when I sat down. Didn't say G-Day. Didn't even nod. Dominic had married my daughter 6 years ago in a ceremony at a winery in the Hunter Valley that cost more than my first house. From the day I met him, he looked at me the way you look at a stain on a tablecloth. Not with hatred, that would have required some form of acknowledgement. More like mild disgust. Like I was something that shouldn't have been there but was too embedded to remove. We're here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Sylvia and Pemberton, Wainwright began, his voice steady and formal. Dominic finally put his phone down. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, like a man at an auction who spotted the lot he came for. "Can we move this along?" he said. "I've got a client meeting at 3. Tessa touched his arm. "Dom, please." He shrugged her off. Not roughly, but dismissively, the way you'd brush a fly from your sleeve. "What?" "We all know what's happening here. Sylvia built the business. She ran it. She made the money. Let's not drag this out." Wainwright looked down at his papers. "The deceased has left specific instructions regarding the distribution of her estate, which includes Pemberton Property Solutions, the family home in Epping, a holiday house on the Central Coast, 2 rental properties in Western Sydney, and various financial assets totaling approximately $3.4 million. $3.4 million. I saw the number hit Dominic like a wave. He sat up straighter. His jaw tightened. I could practically hear his brain recalculating. 3.4, he repeated, as though the solicitor might have gotten it wrong and the real number was higher. That is the estimated current value, yes. Dominic glanced at Tessa, then back at Wainwright. Right. Well, obviously Tessa and I will be taking over the business. We'll move into the Epping house. It's better for the kids, closer to their school. The Central Coast place will keep for holidays. And the rentals can keep ticking over under our management. Donald here can handle the council rates or whatever needs doing. Keep him busy. He said my name wrong. He always said my name wrong. I'm Clive. He called me Donald. Sometimes Derek. Once, at a Christmas barbecue, he called me Dave. After 6 years of marriage to my daughter, the man couldn't even remember my name. Or maybe he could and just didn't care enough to use it. It's Clive, I said quietly. What? My name. It's Clive. He waved his hand. Right, sorry. Point is, we've got a plan. Sylvia would have wanted continuity. Stability. Someone competent managing what she built. The way he said competent while looking at me made my stomach turn. Wainwright cleared his throat. Perhaps we should proceed with the actual contents of the will before making any plans. Sure. Dominic leaned back, crossing his legs. Just being practical. No point dancing around it. We all know Sylvia was the engine. She built the business from nothing. She had the brains, the contacts, the work ethic. He looked at me with that thin smile I'd grown to despise. And Clive here, well, every engine needs a handbrake, I suppose. Tessa's cousin Miranda, who was sitting near the door with Sylvia's sister Pauline, actually laughed. A short, sharp laugh that she tried to cover with a cough, but the damage was done. I felt it in my chest like a stone. Wainwright's expression didn't change, but I noticed his grip tighten on his pen. The deceased has left very specific instructions, he repeated, more firmly this time. Go on then, Dominic said, spreading his hands magnanimously. Let's hear what Sylvia wanted. I stared at the carpet. 40 years of marriage. 40 years of partnership, of building something together, of decisions made late at night over cups of tea at the kitchen table. And here I was, being discussed like a problem to be solved. But I didn't say anything. I'd stopped saying things a long time ago. When you spend years being talked over, talked about, and talked down to, you learn that silence is sometimes the only dignity left. The truth is, I'd been disappearing for years. Not physically. I was always there, at every barbecue, every Christmas, every school concert for the grandkids. But I'd become invisible. A background figure. The bloke in the corner chair who didn't say much and wasn't expected to. It started the year Tessa married Dominic. Before that, our family was small but close. Sylvia ran the property business. I handled the books, the maintenance schedules, the council paperwork, the tenant relations. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary, and Sylvia always said I was the backbone of the operation. You keep the wheels turning, love, she'd tell me. I just steer. But Dominic didn't see it that way. Dominic saw a 60-something bloke in a flannel shirt and work boots, driving a 20-year-old Hilux, and he made his judgment in about 3 seconds flat. The first time he showed his true colors was at their engagement party. His parents flew up from Melbourne for the occasion. His father, Philip, was a property developer in Toorak. His mother, Constance, wore a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my Uda. They arrived at our place in Epping, looked around at the modest brick house with the Hills hoist in the backyard, and I watched something shift behind their eyes. So, Clive, Philip had said, beer in hand, what do you do for a living? I work with Sylvia in the property business, I'd said. Work with her how? I'd tried to explain. The maintenance coordination. The financial records. The tenant management. But Philip had already stopped listening. He was looking over my shoulder at the kitchen, probably calculating the value of our suburb. Well, he'd said, clapping me on the back, it's good Sylvia's got a steady hand on the tiller. Not everyone's cut out for the sharp end of business. That night, after everyone had gone home, I'd heard Dominic talking to Tessa in the garden. They didn't know I was in the laundry, sorting towels. Your old man's a bit of a non-event, isn't he? Dominic had said. What does he actually do? He does heaps, Dom. You don't see it because there's nothing to see, babe. Your mum built everything. He just tags along. Tessa had gone quiet. She didn't defend me. And that silence cut deeper than any insult. The years after the wedding were a slow erosion. Dominic turned every family gathering into a stage for his own performance. He'd talk about his sales targets at the real estate firm. His commission checks. His plans to get into commercial property. And whenever someone mentioned me, he'd find a way to redirect. "Clive's keeping busy, aren't you, mate? Pottering around the house, fixing taps, living the dream." He'd say it with a grin, like it was a compliment, but everyone heard what he really meant. That I was useless. That I contributed nothing. That I was just Sylvia's shadow. The worst was Christmas 4 years ago. We were at Tessa and Dominic's place in Bockham Hills. Big house, 4 bedrooms, heated pool. Dominic was holding court in the living room, telling everyone about his latest deal. "Pulled in 240 grand this financial year," he'd said, swirling his wine. "Not bad for a kid from Brunswick." Sylvia's brother-in-law, Ted, had raised his glass. "Well done, Dom. You're a machine." "It's all about drive," Dominic had said. "Some people have it, some don't." He looked directly at me. "No offense, Clive, but not everyone's built for the hustle. Some blokes are just settlers." The room had laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Sylvia had stared at her plate. Tessa had excused herself to check on the kids. I'd gone to the backyard and sat on the pool edge with my feet in the water, listening to the party carry on without me. I sat there for 2 hours. Nobody came to find me. Not even Sylvia, though later she found me in bed and whispered, "He doesn't mean it, love. He's just insecure." Maybe she was right. Maybe insecure people have a gift for finding exactly the words that make other people feel small. What Dominic never knew, what none of them knew, was that the business they all thought belonged to Sylvia was never actually hers. Pemberton Property Solutions was the public face. It was the name on the signage, the business cards, the website. Sylvia ran it brilliantly. She had the charm, the client skills, the instinct for a good deal. But behind that shopfront was something much bigger, and it had been mine from the beginning. I'd started investing in property when I was 23, years before I met Sylvia. I'd worked 2 jobs through my 20s, laboring on construction sites during the day and driving a delivery truck at night. Every spare dollar went into a deposit on a rundown weatherboard in Granville. I fixed it up myself, sold it, and bought 2 more. By the time I met Sylvia at a friend's barbecue in 1984, I already owned 8 properties through a company called Clive Pemberton Holdings. Sylvia was the first person who saw past the calloused hands and the quiet manner. She saw the spreadsheets, the plans, the ambition that I kept hidden because I'd learned early that people treat you differently when they know you have money. My own brother had tried to borrow $50,000 from me and never paid it back. A mate from the building site had sued me over a fence line dispute that was really about jealousy. I learned to keep my mouth shut and my assets invisible. When Sylvia and I married, we made a decision together. She would be the front of the business. I would stay in the background. She'd handle the clients and the contracts. I'd handle the strategy, the acquisitions, the long-term planning. We'd let the world think she was the success story, and I was just the husband. It worked beautifully for 40 years. Until Sylvia got sick. The pancreatic cancer came fast and cruel. We had 9 months from diagnosis to the end. 9 months to plan, to prepare, to have the conversations that most couples never get to have. We talked about Tessa. About the grandkids. About what would happen to the business. And we talked about Dominic. "He'll try to take everything," Sylvia had said one evening, sitting up in her hospital bed at Westmead. "The moment I'm gone, he'll walk into that solicitor's office and try to carve it all up." "I know," I'd said. "And Tessa won't stop him. She loves him too much and she's been under his thumb too long." "I know that too." Sylvia had taken my hand, her grip weaker than it used to be but still firm. "So we need to make sure the truth comes out at the right time. When it'll matter most." We'd spent those final months with Wainwright, going over every document, every holding, every subsidiary. Making sure everything was in order. Making sure the reveal would be undeniable. Sylvia died on a Tuesday in March. The jacarandas were blooming along our street, and I remember thinking how unfair it was that the world could be so beautiful on the worst day of my life. Now, 3 days later, I was sitting in Wainwright's office, watching my son-in-law plan his takeover. "Mr. Forsyth," Wainwright said, using Dominic's surname with deliberate formality, "before we continue, I need to clarify something important." Dominic frowned. "What kind of clarification?" Wainwright opened a thick manila folder. "You've been operating under the assumption that Mrs. Pemberton owned Pemberton Property Solutions outright. Is that correct?" "Of course she did. She founded it. She ran it. Everyone knows that." Wainwright held up a document. "According to the corporate records filed with ASIC, Pemberton Property Solutions Proprietary Ltd. has never been owned by Sylvia Pemberton. It is, and has always been, a wholly owned subsidiary of Clive Pemberton Holdings Proprietary Limited." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Dominic's face went through a sequence I'll never forget. Confusion, then denial, then something close to panic. His mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. "That's not possible. I assure you it is. These are certified copies of the original ASIC filings, dated 1981. Dominic stood up so fast his chair toppled. "Clive Pemberton Holdings? What the hell is that?" Wainwright looked at me. For the first time in years, someone looked at me not with pity or dismissal, but with something close to respect. Perhaps Mr. Pemberton would like to explain. Every eye in the room turned to me. Tessa's were wide, wet, bewildered. Pauline's jaw had dropped. Miranda was gripping the arm of her chair. And Dominic was standing there, fists clenched at his sides, looking at me like I'd just pulled the ground from under his feet. Which, in a way, I had. "It's my company," I said. My voice was steady. Quiet, but steady. "Always has been." "Your company?" Dominic's voice cracked. "You don't have a company. You don't have anything. You drive a Hilux that's older than my kids." Wainwright continued, calm as a surgeon. "Clive Pemberton Holdings owns not just Pemberton Property Solutions, but several other entities. Pemberton Asset Management, which handles the rental portfolio. Pemberton Capital, which provides financing to small property developers across Western Sydney. And Pemberton Land Trust, which holds commercial and rural properties in the Hunter Valley, the Illawarra, and the Central West." Each name landed on Dominic like a physical blow. I watched his shoulders drop a little more with every one. "The combined value of these entities," Wainwright said, turning a page, "as of the most recent independent valuation, is approximately $21.6 million. Tessa made a sound I'd never heard from her before, something between a gasp and a sob. Dominic grabbed the edge of the table. "21 million? No, that's wrong. Look at him. He shops at Aldi. He wears King G shorts from Lowe's. He eats at the RSL on Friday nights." "Because that's all I need," I said. Dominic stared at me. For 6 years, he'd looked at me like I was nobody. Now he was looking at me like he had no idea who I was. And for the first time, he was right to be confused. "But Sylvia ran the business," he said, his voice smaller now. "She was the one who." "Sylvia was brilliant at what she did," I said. "She had the people skills, the charm, the ability to close a deal over a cup of coffee. I didn't have any of that. What I had was patience, and a gift for numbers, and the good sense to stay invisible." "Why?" Tessa whispered. "Why would you hide all of this?" I looked at my daughter. This beautiful woman who had grown up thinking her father was ordinary. Who had married a man who treated me like a joke. Who had slowly, painfully, stopped seeing me as someone worth knowing. "Because 30 years ago, your mother and I learned that money changes people," I said. "Not the people who have it. The people around them. We wanted to know who our family really was. We wanted to know who would love us for us, not for our bank balance." I let that sit for a moment. Then I looked at Dominic. "And we found out." Dominic's face flushed red. "You were testing me?" This whole time? I was hoping you'd pass, I said honestly. I was hoping my daughter had found a man who would treat her father with basic decency, even if he thought I had nothing. A man who measured people by their character, not their car. I do measure people by their character. You called me a handbrake, Dominic. 20 minutes ago. At your mother-in-law's while reading. You couldn't even remember my name. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Wainwright turned to another section of his folder. There are some additional matters to address. What additional matters? Dominic's voice had a new edge to it. Fear. Regarding your employment at Forsyth and Lane Property Group. Dominic went very still. What about it? Forsyth and Lane was acquired 18 months ago by a holding company called Hilltop Acquisitions. Proprietary Limited. Hilltop Acquisitions is a subsidiary of Clive Pemberton Holdings. The color drained from Dominic's face like water down a plug hole. You bought my company? I bought the company you worked for, I corrected. You never owned it, Dom. You were an employee. A good salesman, I'll give you that. But an employee. Tessa was staring at me. Dad, you've been his boss this whole time? Technically, yes. Though I've never interfered with the day-to-day operations. I had people watching, though. Reading reports. Keeping records. Wainwright pulled out another document. Which brings us to some concerning findings. Over the past 18 months, there have been multiple instances of Mr. Forsyth claiming personal expenses as business costs. Restaurant bills for family dinners listed as client entertainment. A holiday to Noosa charged to the corporate travel account. A new television for his home office that was invoiced as conference equipment. Dominic's Adam's apple bobbed. Those were, everyone does that. It's standard practice. It's fraud, Wainwright said mildly. There's more, I said. I hadn't wanted to bring this part up, but it was necessary. 18 months ago, your company hired a new office manager. A woman named Mrs. Keating. She's 68. Widowed. She'd been out of work for 2 years after her husband died and she needed the income to stay in her home. Dominic said nothing. 3 months after she started, you told your office manager she was too slow for the pace. You made her cry in front of the entire sales floor. You told her she should go back to her garden and leave the real work to people who could handle it. Tessa covered her mouth. Dom, tell me you didn't. She was making mistakes, Dominic said weakly. She couldn't keep up. Her name is Heather Keating, I said. She lives alone in a 2-bedroom unit in Penrith. Her granddaughter has cerebral palsy and Heather's the one who drives her to therapy 3 times a week. She needed that job, Dom. Not for luxuries. For survival. I didn't know, you didn't care to know. That's the difference. The room was silent. Pauline was gripping her handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. Miranda was staring at the floor. Tessa was crying, silently, the tears running down her face unchecked. Dominic sank back into his chair. The arrogance had drained out of him entirely. He looked like a balloon with the air let out. So what happens now? He asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. Wainwright placed a document on the table. Mr. Pemberton has prepared 2 options. Option 1, Mr. Forsyth resigns from Forsyth and Lane with a modest redundancy package, repays all improperly claimed expenses, and signs a confidentiality agreement regarding the family's business interests. And option 2? Termination for cause, based on documented misconduct and fraudulent expense claims. This would void any redundancy entitlements and could result in referral to the appropriate authorities. Dominic stared at the document like it was a snake. The redundancy package, he said quietly. How much? 12 weeks' pay at your current salary, Wainwright said. That's nothing. That's barely enough to. It's more than you offered me, I said. 20 minutes ago, you allocated me the tax bill and told everyone I was lucky to get it. Dominic closed his eyes. Tessa finally spoke, her voice raw and broken. Dad, why didn't you just tell me? Years ago. Why did you let me think you were, that you didn't? That I didn't matter? I finished for her. Because I wanted to see if you'd love me anyway. I wanted to know that when your husband called me useless at Christmas dinner, you'd stand up and say, "That's my father you're talking about." I wanted to know that when he forgot my name for the 100th time, you'd correct him. I wanted to know that my daughter saw me as a person worth defending, even if she thought I had nothing. Tessa's face crumpled. And I didn't. I let him say those things and I just sat there. You were trying to keep the peace. I understand that. Your mother understood it too. But keeping the peace shouldn't mean letting someone destroy your father's dignity at the dinner table. Dominic stood up suddenly. This is manipulation. You set me up. You spent 6 years watching me, waiting for me to fail, and now you're using it against me. I looked at him for a long time. Dominic, I didn't make you say any of those things. I didn't make you steal from your employer. I didn't make you humiliate a 68-year-old woman in front of her colleagues. Every single thing you did because you thought nobody important was watching. That's not a trap. That's a mirror. He had no answer for that. Sign the papers, Dom, Tessa said quietly. He looked at her, startled. Tessa, sign them. Please. Before this gets any worse. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Dominic picked up the pen and signed. His hand was shaking so badly the signature looked like a seismograph reading. Wainwright gathered the documents. I'll process these today. Mr. Forsyth, you have 30 days to clear your personal belongings from the office and return any company property. Dominic stood up without a word and walked toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. I do love your daughter, he said, without turning around. Whatever you think of me, I love Tessa. Then start acting like it, I said. Because love isn't a feeling, Dominic. It's a decision you make every day, in how you treat the people around you, all of them, not just the ones who can do something for you. He left without another word. After the door closed, Tessa and I sat in silence for what felt like a very long time. Wainwright quietly excused himself, murmuring something about giving us privacy. Pauline and Miranda slipped out after him. Mum knew, Tessa said eventually. It wasn't a question. She helped plan it. The timing, the documents, everything. She wanted to make sure you'd be okay after she was gone. By blowing up my marriage? By showing you the truth about your marriage. There's a difference, sweetheart. Tessa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, the same way she used to do when she was 5 and had fallen off her bike. Did she suffer? She asked suddenly. At the end. Was she in pain? I thought about lying. But Sylvia and I had promised each other, no more secrets after this. Some, I said. But she was brave. She was braver than I could ever be. And the last thing she said to me was, take care of our girl, Clive. Show her what a good man looks like. Tessa leaned against my shoulder, the way she used to when she was little and the world felt too big. I missed you, Dad, she whispered. I missed my dad. I've been right here, I said, putting my arm around her. The whole time. I never went anywhere. We sat like that until the afternoon sun moved across the carpet and the office grew quiet around us. Father and daughter, finding our way back to each other through the wreckage of years. As we walked out of the building, Tessa stopped on the footpath and looked at me properly, really looked at me, for the first time in years. Will you teach me? She asked. About the business? About all of it? I smiled. It was the first real smile since Sylvia died. I'd like that very much. 4 months later, I was sitting in my real office. Not the shed out the back of the Epping house where everyone assumed I spent my days tinkering with old radios. My actual office, on the 14th floor of a building I'd owned for 12 years, overlooking Parramatta River. Tessa was across from me, going through a stack of tenancy agreements with the kind of focus and intelligence that reminded me so much of her mother it made my chest ache. Dominic had taken a job in Brisbane. He and Tessa were doing counseling over video calls, working through things slowly. I didn't know if they'd make it. Part of me hoped they would, not for Dominic's sake, but for the grandkids, and because Tessa deserved the chance to decide for herself. But another part of me knew that some damage can't be undone with apologies. Some things, once broken, stay broken in ways you can only see when the light hits them at a certain angle. My desk phone rang. "Mr. Pemberton, Heather Keating is here for her 2 o'clock. Send her in." Heather walked in slowly, the way people do when they're not sure they belong in a room. She was wearing a new blouse and her hair was freshly set. She looked different from the woman I'd read about in those incident reports, stronger, more certain. "Mr. Pemberton," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I just wanted to thank you. Personally. The foundation I'd established in Sylvia's name had covered her granddaughter's therapy costs for the next 3 years. Heather herself had been promoted to office coordinator at one of my other properties, with a proper salary and superannuation. "You don't need to thank me, Heather. You earned everything you've got." After she left, I sat alone for a while, looking out at the river. Sylvia's photo was on my desk, the one from our trip to Uluru 20 years ago, both of us squinting against the sun, red dust on our boots, laughing at something I can't remember anymore. For 40 years, I'd been the man behind the curtain. The silent partner. The invisible hand. I'd been content with that role, happy to let Sylvia take the spotlight while I worked in the shadows. It wasn't sacrifice. It was strategy. And it was love. But now, finally, I could step into the light. Not because I needed anyone's approval. Not because I wanted applause. But because hiding was no longer necessary. The test was over. The truth was out. And here's what I learned, sitting in that solicitor's office, watching a man who thought he was king discover he'd been sitting in someone else's castle the whole time. The way you treat people when you think nobody important is watching, that's who you really are. Not the version you show at dinner parties. Not the version on your LinkedIn profile. The version that comes out when you're talking to someone you think can't do anything for you. Sylvia used to say, "Character isn't what you show the world, Clive. It's what you do when you think the world isn't looking." She was right, as usual. And the old bloke in the flannel shirt, the one with the beat-up Hilux and the Aldi shopping bags, the one who everyone thought was just taking up space? He was looking the whole time.